Good morning and welcome to the Rural Sense Show. I am your host, the Instructive Scholar, Mr. Grant Dahl, and we've got a very interesting topic for you here today. We're going to be talking about the throwaway culture, which is permeating through America. This is a issue that has been getting some press in the last couple of years, especially with the introduction of certain actions such as Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si'. And when we look around us today, we can see effects of it in terms of things that we see in the inner cities and so on. But before we get into that topic, I'd like to introduce our two guests that we have on the show here today. Two very intellectually gifted men. One, those of you who follow the show, will be familiar with. He was my guest last time. And the other is a gentleman who he lives in the midst of what I call Tent City, Los Angeles, California. So, please welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Wilson. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
Very well. How are you?
I am doing fine, sir. Very well, thank you. And the other gentleman here, let's welcome to the show, Mr. Matthew Mazzocco. Matthew, my friend, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, sir. Good day to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good day to you as well. All right. So let's get into this here a little bit. I know that both of you, one of you living in Washington, D.C., and the other living in Los Angeles, California, you probably have seen some of the effects of the throwaway culture that our country seems to be afflicted with today. Matthew, why don't we start with you?
Because I don't want to. That would be one thing. The throwaway culture. There are so many ways that it's evident. I don't know how very different it is in Los Angeles in my experience, but it's very prevalent, and it's sad because it's something that it's not a direct action that people take. It's not something that's so easy to pin down, much like modernism itself. It's not one little thing. You used a good word, permeates. It permeates the everyday activities of individuals, and it's everybody. It's myself to a degree, and a number of people that I know. It's just it's very common, and it is difficult to catch unless you're looking for it. But it's definitely there. It's definitely present.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can see that as well, Paul, living in D.C. Because I'm sure, I know in every time I've been there, I've seen it just permeating all through the city.
And pretty much everywhere else on the sides of the streets, you have just trash lying about. I thought I'd take a more macro view.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the United States Department of Agriculture website, and I'm looking at a topic called food waste. And so what I wanted to ask, I have a little pop quiz for everyone. In the United States, what percentage of food is wasted? Or what percent of the food supply is wasted, do you think?
40.
I'm going to be guessing around like 82% at least.
No. Matthew is right. In the United States, food waste is estimated at about 30 to 40% of the food supply. And there's various estimates. I've seen anywhere from like 30 to 50. But basically, if you think about it, a third to a half of our food, what we eat, what we consume, it's produced, it's perfectly healthy or whatever. You can eat it, and it's totally wasted. So I think looking at the scope of the problem is really, really going to be necessary if we want to determine, okay, how bad is it? Well, it's a third to half of what sustains us.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. It is very, very prevalent, and I know that one thing that in my own town here of Fargo, North Dakota, I see. I've seen it myself here too. And I didn't mean to pick on Washington D.C. and Los Angeles just as prime examples or something like that, because it really is prevalent throughout many of our major cities and even some of the smaller ones, because you see it just in the mounds of garbage that we have. I know here in Fargo we've got a city dump which is so huge that I just can't really fathom just how much garbage that they put into there all the time and stuff like that. Now, I mean, thankfully, I mean, and this is one thing I just wanted to throw out here as something. I don't know if you guys have seen this happening in your own areas, um, but I would like to see if it has. I mean, here in Fargo, to try to combat some of that, I know there's been a movement going on to get the restaurants in the area to donate the leftover food that they have at the end of the day, to the homeless shelters and stuff like that. I know a lot of the pizza places do that, and I think some of the other restaurants are starting to do that. But but do you think that that's an effective solution to some of the problem, not all of it? But is that effective solution to some of it? And have you seen it starting to take root, maybe in your own communities or other communities that you know of? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Um, some already do. I know some Paneras do. I know some other restaurants do as well. But I mean, it'll help. There are little things that can help. I think awareness is the first key. Basically, knowing what it is that's going on, and then you can do small steps like basically donating to homeless shelters, restaurants donating to homeless shelters, that kind of thing. That is one of the steps that can be taken. So yes, I do think that is a good idea.
Yeah, and then Matthew, do you see that happening in your own area, and do you agree with that solution also?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Could you repeat what you said? I'm kidding.
Of course.
So, as we're discussing it, something comes to mind that I listened to once, and it was a debate between a Jesuit priest, Father Frederick Copleston, and I believe it was Bertrand Russell, famous atheist, very well respected, intelligent man, both of them. And it was on the nature of the existence of God. And as before any discussion, they took the careful step of clarifying their terms. And I believe it took approximately 20 minutes or so of these two gentlemen discussing the various attributes of what they considered to be God. And after that point in time, they realized that they could no longer have a discussion because they disagreed upon the definition. And so they couldn't proceed forward with the discussion. So I waste a good minute on that in order to ask if we might be able to define our term of the throwaway culture and limited scope in the discussion, because as we're discussing this, you go to food waste, and agriculture is something that I have an interest in. I have an amateurish interest in the state of agriculture, not in this country, but worldwide, and ways in which waste permeates it. But if we could clarify what we mean by throwaway culture and what we're looking to limit the discussion to, because this expands outward into a lot of different areas of life where it gets into much deeper moral implications as well. And I just want to be able to restrict my brain to thinking about what we want to be talking about here, if we could, Mr. Dahl.
Okay. Well, I mean, the way that I define throwaway culture here is something that, you put it together, or you put something together, whether it be food or a building or something like that, and it's all the rage for a short time, but then you're in a mindset to just discard, as soon as it ceases becoming useful to you, or you build it with the mentality that it's not going to last very long or something like that. Or that it doesn't serve any useful purpose than to make you money. I know that may sound like rather broad in some ways, but it's basically just I guess I look at the throwaway culture as a mentality. It's basically a mentality of here today, gone tomorrow, and basically just like I don't think about what's gone tomorrow, and stuff like that. And that's kind of where I see the major problem taking place in our world today, is this mentality of here today, gone tomorrow. So I mean that's how I look at it. Paul, what do you define as it?
Here today, gone tomorrow is a good slogan. I don't know if it's really a definition, but it's a very good slogan. I would basically say that throwaway culture could be defined as a culture where, like, as a definition, how would we put it? A culture where things are replaced far before it is necessary to replace them. I'm trying to think of a specific, more specific way of putting that. But things are replaced before they are needed to be replaced is the general idea.
Okay.
All right.
So
Just
go
looking
ahead.
to clarify that. It seems like we're restricting it to physical goods, physical goods or services. So that'll be more helpful to be able to restrict that. And I agree entirely. So speaking back to Paul's first point on agriculture, if we're looking at root causes, I think part of it is misinformation, and that's not to say that entirely mitigates any culpability of everybody in the chain, but there's a certain lack of knowledge that exists that then contributes to these inefficiencies that result in a good amount of this waste. So I don't think it would be fair to talk about the judgment of the throwaway culture without being able to say a portion of it is due to simply being inefficient, because I don't know about either of you gentlemen, but I am not at 100% efficiency in all aspects of my life.
Point taken.
Yep.
So in part, it's just there's just a certain amount of inefficiency built into the system that we have been gifted.
Yes, I would agree with that very, very much, that attitude, because I mean, if you look at it, I mean, it's like I'm going to use a regular example that affects me like at least every week, if not every day. Um, Basically, I go to the store to buy food. And I know we're talking about food again here, but I'm going to the store to buy food, and my food is packaged in material that is supposed to be disposed of as soon as it's done. And the only purpose for that container was to keep the food from being tampered with before it reached my hands and before it slid through and was paid for. So so I can see the truth in your statement there, Matthew, that it is kind of built into the system, and we are not perfect in keeping this in keeping our stuff under control, and and keeping this throwaway aspect under control, because that is a natural reaction. We take the packaging off the food and we throw it away. Same as if we buy like an office chair, we throw away the other materials that are not inherently important to the survival of the chair once it's built, and things of that nature. So I mean, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have our food protected and stuff like that. I mean, who wants to handle raw meat in the store? But, uh, but at the same time, it's like where do you both see that there could potentially be a balance between protecting our protecting like our food or our materials or something like that, in a place where they can be easily acquired by us without being tampered, but at the same time keeping under control this mentality of just tossing the stuff the stuff that's served its purpose and has no real use for us after we're done, with getting the food out or putting the chair together or whatever. So I mean, Matthew, why don't we start with you on this one?
I think that's an excellent point, and it brings to mind an article that I read recently. Perhaps both of you managed to see it at some point over the last few weeks. It was a grocery store which had, I believe it was just a section, an entire aisle that was stocked with items without the use of plastic. And that's a pretty significant move, because plastic is, for lack of a more effective term, it's a magical material because of its multitudinous uses. But unfortunately, plastic is impossible to discard effectively. It's something which we have not paid attention to globally, really, for years, ever since it started. I mean, it was revolutionary. Its use in everything. Just it is everywhere. But plastic never degrades. Plastic is able to be cut down into smaller and smaller pieces, but it never actually degrades into constituent parts. Are either of you aware of the Pacific Garbage Patch?
I was actually about to bring that up myself, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. We'll hold that for Paul then. But it's interesting because as a manufacturer, when you're looking at your product, whatever agricultural product it happens to be, that's a good point. You need to get it to the consumer safely, and it needs to be able to preserve it so that it won't be wasted, so that along the way the shelf life is long enough so that our current distribution system is able to take the amount of time that it requires to be able to get it there and be there on the shelf long enough for someone to be able to pick it up so it doesn't become waste. And there are a number of outlets who are switching from a non-biodegradable plastic to alternative items. But the difference is we have relied upon plastic so long, and it was so inexpensive to be able to make it. It is a difficult transition. It's much more difficult to change course by 30 degrees than it is to simply point the ship in the right direction and go straight from the beginning. So I think part of the problem is we have this momentum in one direction, and it is institutionalized throughout the entire agricultural sector specifically. And I'm sure that the same is true of many other sectors where this throwaway culture permeates. But specifically in agricultural, I can say that's one that we see all of the time. And like you mentioned, many people go out and get fast food or even from the grocery store, all these packages, we toss it away because it's outlived its usefulness. It was there for that one thing, and then we toss it, and we think nothing of it. And I'd like to get Paul to weigh in, but our next question, I'd like to discuss the broader perspective that allows us to have this mentality, because I think that is a large part of the problem of very myopic in our view.
Okay, all right. Why don't we go to you, Paul, and then we'll head back to Matthew to bring up the next bigger point. So go ahead, Paul.
So Matthew brought up some very, very good points. One of the small things I wanted, two things, I guess. One, let's talk about the garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. Specifically, it's called some people, it's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as it were. And this patch is basically a whole bunch of trash just collected together. And it's not visible from space or whatever, but it's just like a trash island, essentially, of plastic that just kind of collects and collects over time. And Grant, how large would you say that this trash island would be in terms of what would be, like, let's compare it to the size of Texas, for example. How big would this trash patch be?
I'm going to guess that it's probably the size of the city of Houston or the city of Dallas, Dallas-Fort Worth.
Nope, much bigger.
Much bigger. So
much bigger.
Maybe it's the size of Texas itself.
More than double that.
More than double that.
1.6 million square kilometers. And that's, basically, it's not over time, and there's 325 million people in the United States or whatever, but basically just builds up over time, and eventually it's like, oh, we have a problem here. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a very good point. Because it's like in throwing something away, people think it fades into an abyss or something like that, and the reality is that that's not the case. We have to have a place to put it. And
well, it's a little bit more. I don't think people actually do think about it. I think it's, as you said before, out of sight, out of mind. It's one of those things you don't think about it, and once you do consciously think about it, that's when you can actually have an attempt to change things. Because I think with a lot, like when this got started, no one really cared about where the plastic went. It just goes in the dump or whatever. But eventually, it doesn't all go in the dump. It kind of float. It breaks up into smaller pieces, and then what do you do with it? And that's, I think, the reckoning, as it were. Okay, this is happening. We let things build, and then okay, what happens then?
Right. Okay, so when we get back to you, Matthew, and the transitional point that you had there, just kind of building off that, what do you see as being the next step here?
Reform of how humans think. So if we could just get that down, we'd be fine. I agree with what Paul was saying about the garbage patch and the size. It is almost impressive. And the size estimates are difficult because, of course, we're not talking about a particular object of a specific density that we can say it's exactly of this volume. I mean, we're talking about this massive portion of our ocean that in parts per million has just all over the scale these elements that are just garbage that will not break down. And it's there, it's out of sight, and the only people who really see it, for whom it's present, are the few people who are on those islands that are in the middle of the patch where it is just accumulating all of this building on the shores, and fishermen, because the fishermen are seeing a tremendous amount of the fish that they are trying to catch for food production for we humans, and they're cutting them open and they're finding trash. And this is our food source. And I don't know what the percentage is, but a huge percentage of the human food source comes from the ocean. And part of the problem is our very limited view where, well, I see the meal in front of me. I'm going to discard the packaging and put it in this trash can, whatever it is, or maybe the side of the street, as some people do. And I'm going to ignore the effects long term because I'm only concerned about the here and the now and the self. And if we do that long enough, this is what happens.
Yes, that is so. Basically it comes down to the concept of actions have consequences, and that's something that we've really lost here in the in our modern world. I mean, especially like I know. If I could move on to another section here that I'm really starting to see some of this. If you go into the major cities, I know this is the case in the place that I used to grow up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I see it in the center. Now they're trying to do something about it. I will grant them that, but you see a ton of buildings, old buildings, and lots that are just being left because they're not fashionable enough. They're not, spread out enough. They don't really fit what the urban developers want, and so they're leaving these places to rot. And they're becoming real eyesores on the landscape, and they're becoming crime infested. It's where gangs get together and hold their little secret meetings and so on. You see graffiti all over the places and stuff like that. And it's really sad to see. And in the meantime, we're losing, getting back to agriculture here, we're losing farmland by the fact that the cities are growing outward and trying to find new places to build and not rebuilding on the inside, which means that they're leaving these rotting cores and these external, areas which are eating up beautiful farmland and beautiful, beautiful natural landscapes and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that, certain smaller cities don't have a right to build themselves up, but it seems that they've got a lot of this mentality, out of sight, out of mind, and they seem to be doing this at the expense of the inner cities and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys living in the cities that you do, you probably see that yourselves. Would you like to comment on that? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think, like, you know, the, 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 it's a little bit more complicated than that. You see, I live in the DC metropolitan area where everything is expanding like crazy. I mean, basically, it's grown tremendously. The suburbs are now essentially out to Manassas now, which is essentially 30 miles outside of DC, whereas it used to be like Fairfax or whatever, which is like 15 miles outside of DC. So like, there's definitely expansion going on, but it's not. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious effort. It's just people making little decisions over time. Okay, I want to move outside the sprawl, as it were, and people do just that, and they try and move outside the sprawl, and eventually the sprawl catches up, and you keep going. I don't necessarily think it's a conscious effort to try and basically say, hey, let's create these big rotting hulks in the middle of the city. I think there's just lots of people making individually rational decisions that don't necessarily, see the big picture of like 10,000, 15,000 people doing the same thing, and so they make individually rational decisions that end up, in the long term, causing what you said.
Yeah, and I'm not actually saying here that that this is a conscious effort. I'm just saying that they seem to. It was kind of like we said. It's like here today, gone tomorrow. They don't think about the fact that as they expand outward, they're leaving the insides to rot by, especially these businesses that move outside the, urban middle and stuff like that. It's an unintended consequence, just like we were talking about with the food waste, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That, it's like, the stuff has to go somewhere. It's like we have to go somewhere. We have to have a better spot, but we're not thinking about what's happening in the middle of our cities and stuff like that. I guess that was kind of the point I was trying to make. So, I mean, Matthew, do you have anything to say about this particular topic? I mean, I know you're living in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is one of the most sprawling cities in all of America, if not the world.
It is definitely, and it is just laden with people. We have, similar to what Paul was describing, we have that. We have people strolling outward farther and farther, people who try to get into less densely populated areas because that's what they want. And then as developers see opportunity, well, I have this amount of land here. I can put X number of units here and bring in more and more people, collect as much rent. It's an economic decision. They're not doing it for the purpose of any of what you described. They're doing it simply for profit. They see, well, people need housing. I can provide that housing, be compensated for it handsomely. The side effect is a certain degree of density and certain efficiency built into the system again. So it's definitely the exact same thing out here. It's just going to depend upon different areas, and certain cities will pass their different regulations and laws limiting the expansions as they see fit. But in the end, they're also making their decision on what's going to be best for the cities, because they need to remain solvent as well. They need to keep their existing occupants happy, and they need to be able to be looking for opportunities to grow in business and, I would like to say, cultural development. That's really not high on the list of priorities in most cities. But so as I mentioned, individuals making decisions that are generally aimed in a particular direction. And I appreciate that he brought up that point, because that speaks to the underlying issue of what we're evaluating in the moment when we're making these decisions. There's something that we can take when we do looking at the stock market. My work in finance, it keeps me focused on we're looking at business, and the way that America does business and focuses on business, it's on a quarter-to-quarter basis, because you have millions of investors looking at the price of your company, or you and your board of directors are looking at your particular company, and you know that your shareholders vote you in your spots. They vote you to be the directors of this company. So you need to keep them happy. these shareholders are always at your financial reports, and on a quarterly basis, there's always a projection of what earnings are coming in per share of this company. And they may say, maybe it's 24 cents a share, maybe it's 16 cents a share, whatever it is. This is what we're expecting you to make this quarter, in this 90-day period. This is what you should make. So their entire focus is we need to be sure that we hit our projected earnings. Because if we don't, and if we do that enough times, our shareholders will be putting us out. We need to keep the shareholders happy. And of course, they're to whatever the company's, if they have one, their mission is, whatever they're intended to produce, to get it to whomever it is wants to produce it. But they're looking at it on a quarterly basis. Whereas in certain other countries, Japan comes to mind specifically, when they're doing their planning for their businesses, they're not looking at it in one quarter. One quarter is a blip. It's mission. They're making a plan for 25, 40 years out, where the company intended to be. And they're looking at it as though it is over the lifespan of this company and not simply, let's keep people happy for the moment in which they can make this adverse decision. And it's a very short-sighted way of going about it. And we're doing it in business, not just because that's how we think of business, because that's how we, in a particular country, think about existence. It's very short-lived. We're living for the here and the now, and consideration for the later. I think part of the problem is a certain degree of selfishness and individualism, because, and I apologize for bringing the subject so late in the call, because I know we talk about it for quite some time, but what I would call individualism, and that's not my term, I'm sure someone far smarter than I, who I've read before, implanted that into my brain, because we have been growing that code over the last, well, I'm sure hundreds of years, but very, very specific in this country, over the last 70 or so years, more and more adding on to this cult of individualism that forces us to think about the individual and ourselves. We've become very self-centered and not thinking about posterity, not thinking about what we're leaving for the generations to come.
Yeah, those are all really excellent points, and you know it does speak to something, this cult of individualism that we see, you know, coming up and so forth. Because I mean, and this is something I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent here, but you know, where individualism is concerned, it seems that there has to be a balance between, you know, respecting the person as the individual and the fact that the individual is a part of a community and that they have responsibilities to that community to contribute to the to contribute to the greater good. Now, that does not mean that this should be, you know, mandated by secular authority, but the individual has to make his own conscientious decisions, you know, to be a part of the community and to restrict, you know, his individual needs to an extent where I guess where I kind of draw the line is where it's like, okay, it's like, where am I being a burden to the community? Because there I need to solve my own problems first, but as soon as those problems are solved, I need to turn around and start helping with the community and stuff like that. So, so that's kind of where I see the dividing line between this individualism that you're talking about, Matthew, and between, you know, the need to, you know, think of the good of the community and contribute to the good of the community. So, I mean, I'm not exactly sure, you know, what you guys would think about that. I mean, Paul, do you have anything to add to those points?
Well, I mean, we are all Catholics, so we would put it the common good, as it were, to work towards the common good. Trying to think of a way to put this. No, I don't think I really have anything to add to that. I think that's very well put. I think, as you said, it needs to be on an individual level. It needs to be on a personal level. Okay, what can I do? What can I do? And to help others. What can I do to not necessarily be a burden, because thinking of oneself as a burden is always a tricky thing to do, and usually leads to problems. But okay, where can I better help the community? Where can I be a more positive force for doing good, as it were?
Okay. Yeah. No, that's those are very good points to make. It's like just think. I mean, I guess when I was talking about burden, I was more saying it's just like, it's like just make sure that you're not being a burden. That's not saying looking at yourself as a burden all the time. It's just saying, it's like, am I relying too much on charity in this particular area or something like that when I could improve myself and stop relying on charity.
Well, it doesn't even necessarily need to be about charity as well. I mean, it's like basically, maybe, for example, in the case of plastics, those little plastic baggies that basically you use, put food once in, maybe use like a tote bag, for example, reusable tote bag. That might be a good way of basically, here is a concrete place where I can make improvements. If that is viable, let's do that, for example. So looking for concrete ways in which you can improve the situation and improve, eventually over time, the community as well.
Yes, I would agree with that. Matthew, would you agree with that point?
Speaking to the tote that Paul brings up, I don't know how much the rest of the country has focused on this, but in California, in the last 3 years, there was heated debate about the use of plastic bags. And these are the bags that are commonly used at the grocery stores, where, all right, you buy your $87 of groceries in this trip, and you end up with 3, 4, 5 bags to be able to carry your things. And we've done this for years. And in this state, we passed a law, specifically in LA County, that has banned the use of plastic bags. And it was a very loud passing, because you had a lot of people who were saying, yes, we talked about this great specific garbage patch, we need to stop it. And then you have businesses on the other side, many of them, who see it as, well, this is an inexpensive way for us to be able to get you your product tackled. Again, secondly, we've done this for quite some time. We don't like change. So in the end, that's what we switched to. It was no longer permissible to simply give out these plastic bags, and now people have to pay for bags when they want to use them. And it was written in the law so that businesses will not be losing money on it, because that money doesn't go to the state to support any kind of environmental measures that I can recall. It's simply profit that goes to the business. And I'm not making a judgment on rightness or wrongness. It simply is how it is. That business is able to charge 10 cents for a bag that people use. So a lot of people over to those totes. And I myself have switched over to using the tote. And when I do remember to bring it with me into the grocery store, it is a great help. When I don't, it is less than useful.
Yeah.
Getting out of the car.
Yes, I could. Yeah, I can definitely see the point that's being raised there. And again, I remember hearing something about that law when it was passed or something like that, but I don't know enough about it and some of the requirements that are made to be able to pass a judgment on it. Although it sounds like it's trying to get people to think, and that in itself is a good thing when you get people to think about in more ways the consequences of the actions that they take. We're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to wrap up by just going around to each of us. I'll go last, but just to see. What would be some common sense solutions that we as individuals could start doing? I mean, because obviously we can't expect our conduct to be mandated. That only leads to problems in the long run. But what are small things that we as individuals can do to try to get over this this mentality, and to start working against the throwaway mentality and actually start working towards being more responsible with the stuff that we make. or the stuff that we use, I should say. So, Matthew, why don't we start with you on this one?
I think one of the most significant changes you can make on an individual level is to be willing to take a little bit more time, our precious time, and put a little bit of effort into researching what we are consuming and who it is that is producing it and what methods are they using in order to get it to us. And I know it's a large ask because we're accustomed to the simplicity of walking by something, realizing that we want it, we grab it, use it, and we discard what we don't need. And it's a very, quote-unquote, efficient way of getting what we want. But obviously, long-term, it's not efficient. It's leading to these problems that we're discussing. So when you have the ability to stop for a moment and think, well, I have 2 different vendors I can support by giving them money for their product. One of them charges me 97 cents more than the other for an equal product. But this one, the way they have their entire operation run, it's a much more sustainable model that doesn't leave as much waste. And long term, that's something that I would like to invest in. I would like to invest in a mentality that values sustainability and even system regeneration rather than simple depletion. So is it worth that 9 cents for me to be able to give that to this company that's doing it rather than simply going to the lowest bidder because I want what I want, and what I want does not include that culture of sustainability. So I think that's probably the most singularly helpful change that we can make is in our purchasing habits to be able to tell that then directly impacts the bottom line of businesses. And once they start to look at, well, which businesses are experiencing growth and which businesses are experiencing decline, that will then tell them what changes need to be made in order. They will follow the money. And if the money is flowing in the direction of sustainable methods, then they will have to start making changes.
Very good points. Very good points. So, okay, Paul, what do you have to add? What kind of solutions would you think we as individuals should start working on?
Well, first of all, I agree with pretty much everything Matthew said right there. I think that's a very good way of putting it. I would also, I tend to take things in a more specific way. Okay, what would, let's take an individual example. For me, at least, I mean, right out of college or whatever, I was eating a lot of fast food. And fast food, as you know, comes with health issues, obviously, but it also comes with like packaging issues. Basically, it's the sort of, I don't know, epitome of the throwaway culture, for example. So you take it, you eat it, and then you dispose of the packaging. It's usually in plastic or cardboard or whatever, and it's just here today, gone tomorrow. You don't think about it again. And so basically recognize that in your own life and say, okay, are there ways in which I can change that? And I'm starting to do so. It's hard because habit, it's really hard to make a course correction. As Matthew said earlier, you're trying to change your eating habits and you're so ingrained going to, I'm craving a burger or whatever. It's a slow and steady process of, okay, maybe you can't eliminate it entirely. Maybe the occasional time eating out is a good thing. But you slowly start to push yourself in a direction which is basically cooking for yourself instead of basically going out 5, 6, like as in my case, 5, 6 times a week. And that's, I think, things of that nature are basically looking at ways in which you can look at your own life and make positive changes towards that end. I think that having that kind of mindset, okay, what can be fixed? What can I do to fix it? Where am I having issues? What can I fix? And then you fix it, or at least you try to fix it. And so it's a slow process. It's like these kinds of things do not happen overnight. You recognize there are issues, but you don't necessarily fix them. Oh, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that tomorrow, and then. But you eventually you push towards fixing your issues.
Yes, I would agree with everything that you've said, Paul, and with everything Matthew you have said too. I mean, I just want to add something here, just kind of a little throwback here. I mean, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I know in my particular case, I mean, I have ancestors who lived through the Great Depression, and they were living on farms, so they were the poorest of the poor. So they did not throw things away, haphazardly. They found other ways to use things that they acquired, and they were still packaging food even back then. But they would find, like when you were done with the sugar tin, you did not throw it away. You used it to store the dog food, or you used it to store something else, or things of that nature. And so and that's a mentality that's, I know in my own family that's kind of, stuck around, and it's like, and I know in some ways I have really tried to cut down on it, but again, I am not perfect. I have areas where, like for instance, paper. I throw away paper, very, very frequently, and that's something I should probably cut down on and try to recycle the stuff instead, and things like that. But I would agree with you that it is a conscious mentality, and it requires a change in thinking. I think very, very much so. It requires a change in perspective that you have to train yourself to do, and I think this kind of goes to your point, Paul, is that you have to train yourself to not look at something as simply something that is to be discarded, it's in the way, it's cluttering or something like that. You have to look at it with the perspective of what else can I use it for? It's like, is it possible to use it for something else? And stuff like that. Now, some things, once they break, they're beyond salvaging or something like that. Like a plastic container with a big burn hole through the middle is obviously not going to be able to be used again to hold food or something like that. You are going to have to get rid of it. But if you have I'm going to use one example. Let's say I go out and order a meal of macaroni and cheese or something like that from a local restaurant. And I come back and I've got the plastic container, and the plastic container is still good after I've eaten the meal and washed out the container. I should find ways to reuse that container and not just throw it away and stuff like that. It's like but again, it is a conscious decision. It's a mentality that needs constant practice, and it goes back to the points that you both made. It's going to require changing habits, and that takes time. And and again, I think we are starting to see a change in some of those mentalities, with like I pointed out, with the restaurants donating their leftover food at the end of the day to homeless shelters and stuff like that. And I think in this economy, a lot of people have now come to the point where they have to start saving certain things because, they can't afford that bookshelf, so that cardboard box is going to serve that purpose. So you just use that instead of throwing away the cardboard box. So I think that there are ways that, that they are starting to improve that mentality. But again, like you both said, it's going to take time. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take it's going to take conscious effort on our part in order to really solve this problem. And it's going to take individual sacrifice on our parts to solve this problem as well. So I'm just going to wrap up here with just any closing thoughts from all of you. So Matthew, do you have any closing thoughts before we call it a day?
I don't think so. I think we covered the gamut that we really sought to cover. And obviously, this is a subject that, because its source is in the way that humans think, you can talk about this forever. And we focused a lot on agriculture, but there are a lot of other ways that this goes into our decision making, and all the way into how we value other human lives. And obviously, there are other issues that come from it. So I think it's a good start. Definitely, we will say.
Yes, I would agree. And Paul, do you have any final thoughts on your end?
I mean, this is the kind of topic which we could talk about for 6 to 8 hours straight and basically never be done. But I think it's a good this was a good start, and I'm really happy to have spoken with Matthew and yourself, Mr. Dahl, and it was, thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you very much, both of you, and I will definitely be talking to both of you here again in the future. Thank you for coming on board today. So
Thank you very much, both of you.
thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of the Rural Sense Show, and be sure to tune in next time when we will have another great conversation on the issues of the day. Remember, the solutions to today's problems always begin with you in your community. Take care, everyone. So long.